Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going back to the 18th century, the age of exploration and discovery.
Definitely a fascinating period.
We'll be looking at Captain James Cook's first voyage, specifically using excerpts from the Rest is History podcast.
Oh, yeah, I love that podcast. Those guys are great storytellers.
Yeah, they really bring history to life. And Cook's voyages are really full of adventure and, intrigue.
Absolutely. It's not just, sailing from point A to point B. It's about pushing the boundaries of knowledge, encountering new cultures, and reshaping our understanding of the world.
It's 1769. Cook set sail with a pretty ambitious mission, right? To observe the transit of Venus from Tahiti.
Huge astronomical event at the time.
But he also has these secret orders to search for this, legendary Great Southern Continent.
The fabled Terra Australis Incognita, it had captivated European imaginations for centuries.
And of course, if he finds it, he's supposed to claim it for Britain.
Standard operating procedure for the time.
Empire Building 101, right? So we've got science exploration and imperial ambition all rolled into one.
Classic Enlightenment era stuff. A real mix of curiosity and, well, a sense of European superiority.
Yeah, that tension is something we'll see throughout Cook's journey. So let's talk about Tahiti.
Tahiti. The supposed paradise.
Joseph Banks, the naturalist on board, called it Arcadia.
Well, he was in for a bit of a surprise.
Because it turns out paradise wasn't exactly what they expected.
Not quite the untouched Eden they'd imagined. Europeans had already been there,
Yeah.
interacting, trading, leaving their mark. The Tahitians weren't exactly the noble savages of Enlightenment fantasy either.
Right. They had their own complex society, their own customs, beliefs, ways of doing things. And that led to some pretty interesting clashes.
Oh, yeah, for sure. The podcast mentions theft, sexual encounters, anxieties about venereal disease, all highlighting the difficulties of, cross-cultural interaction.
Can you unpack that a little bit? What were some of the key points of friction?
Well, imagine you're a sailor. You've been at sea for months. Cramped conditions, not exactly the most hygienic. Suddenly, you arrive in this tropical paradise. Lush vegetation, vibrant colors, a totally different way of life. The temptation to trade, to interact with the Tahitians must have been overwhelming.
And it sounds like those interactions often crossed boundaries.
Oh, yeah. Things got complicated.
The podcast mentions that the Tahitians were particularly interested in nails, which seems a bit random.
Right. Not gold or spices, but nails. It shows you the different values at play. The Tahitians saw them as valuable tools and trade items. The Europeans were focused on claiming land resources, asserting their authority.
And then there's the whole issue of sex.
Ah, yes. Always a point of contention.
Cook himself apparently didn't partake, horrified by the idea of venereal disease.
He was a stickler for rules and discipline, constantly trying to keep his men in check, worried about disease exploitation, maintaining order.
So it wasn't just a personal quirk. It was part of his broader approach to leadership.
Yeah, definitely. He was trying to juggle his scientific mission with, the demands of empire building and maintain some semblance of control over his crew.
It's that constant push and pull, isn't it? Curiosity and control. The desire to explore and understand new cultures, but also to impose your own values and beliefs.
Absolutely. And for Cook, that tension must have been incredibly intense, given his dual mission and the weight of expectations on him.
Navigating uncharted territory, both geographically and culturally.
A real balancing act.
But even amidst all this tension, there are these moments of wonder and fascination.
True.
Banks witnesses surfing for the first time. The word tattoo enters the English language, thanks to Tahitian body art.
Those are pretty cool legacies.
It shows how these encounters, however fraught, could also lead to genuine cultural exchange.
And let's not forget Tupia, the Tahitian man who joins the expedition. He's eager to see the world experience something new.
It adds a whole other layer to the story.
It reminds us that this voyage was a journey of discovery for everyone involved, not just the Europeans.
And what about Cook? What were his impressions of the Tahitians? Did he see them as equals, potential subjects, or something else entirely?
It's hard to say. Cook was a complex figure capable of both admiration and disdain. He was fascinated by them, observed their customs, tried to learn their language, even expressed a certain level of respect. But he also viewed them through the lens of his own cultural biases, judging their practices as, savage or uncivilized.
A reminder that even the most intrepid explorers were products of their time.
Definitely. Their views were shaped by the prevailing attitudes of 18th century Europe.
So how did this initial encounter in Tahiti shape Cook's approach to future interactions?
Well, that's a question that will unfold as we continue our deep dive into his voyage.
Did he learn from his experiences, or did he double down on his sense of European superiority?
It's a question that resonates even today. How do we approach cultures different from our own? How do we balance the desire to learn and understand with the potential for exploitation and misunderstanding?
Big questions, and ones that will continue to emerge as we follow Cook's journey to New Zealand, a land that will present him with a whole new set of challenges and insights.
New Zealand is a whole different ballgame. The Maoris were not as welcoming as the Tahitians.
That's for sure.
They had a fierce warrior culture and a deep connection to their land. They weren't about to let these newcomers just waltz in and take over.
Sounds like Cook's in for a wild ride.
But buckle up. It's about to get interesting. From Tahiti, Cook and his crew sail on to New Zealand, a land shrouded in mystery, right? It's part of this quest for the great southern continent.
Still chasing that elusive landmass.
Exactly. What they found in New Zealand, though, was a world apart from the, idyllic beaches of Tahiti.
The podcast describes the Maori as fierce warriors with intricate tattoos and complex social structures.
Oh, yeah. They were skilled navigators, too, and incredibly strong defenders of their land. They weren't going to welcome these newcomers with open arms.
Definitely not a passive encounter. So what sparked these confrontations? The podcast mentions a stolen musket.
Yeah, that's a recipe for disaster. One of the Maori men tries to make off with a musket from the Endeavour.
Bold move.
The Marines on board panic and open fire. It ends tragically. The Maori man is killed.
That's awful. Just goes to show how quickly things can escalate when you have cultural misunderstandings and fear on both sides.
Absolutely. And Cook is stuck in the middle. He's supposed to be exploring, but he's also under pressure to, assert British dominance.
A tough balancing act.
His orders were to avoid violence if possible, but also to use force if necessary to protect his crew and achieve his objectives.
So he's walking a tightrope between diplomacy and, outright aggression.
Yeah, it's a delicate situation, but in the midst of all this tension, Cook witnesses something that truly captivates him. A Maori war dance.
The podcast describes it as this incredibly powerful and intimidating performance.
Yeah.
Almost primal in its intensity.
Cook was mesmerized. He documented every detail, the movements, the facial expressions, the chanting, the raw energy.
I get chills just thinking about it.
And what's fascinating is that many believe this dance to be an early form of the haka.
You mean the ceremonial dance performed by the All Blacks?
The very same. The haka has become an iconic symbol of New Zealand's culture and strength.
To think that Cook witnessed its origins. It's amazing.
Despite the tension and the clashes, Cook was clearly intrigued by the Maori. He admired their skills as warriors, their connection to the land, their fierce independence.
But there's also a darker side to this encounter, right? The podcast mentions cannibalism.
Yeah. That was a practice that horrified and repulsed many Europeans. They saw it as the ultimate proof of savagery.
Understandably so.
Cook himself was shocked. But he also tried to understand it within the context of Maori culture. He didn't just dismiss them as barbarians. He actually noted that they were otherwise kind and humane.
So he was trying to see beyond the surface, to find the humanity even in customs that he found disturbing.
Exactly. It shows a certain level of open-mindedness on his part. He wasn't just blindly applying European judgments.
It seems like this encounter with the Maori was a turning point for Cook, a moment where he starts to question the simplistic narratives of European superiority.
Perhaps. Maybe he began to see the world in shades of gray rather than black and white.
Did this newfound awareness change his actions, though? Did it lead to a more respectful approach in his dealings with indigenous peoples?
That's a question we'll explore as we delve into Cook's arrival in Australia.
A land that will present him with a completely different set of challenges and insights.
From the paradise of Tahiti to the volatile encounter with the Maori, Cook's journey takes another unexpected turn.
Let's see what awaits him on the shores of this vast and unknown continent. So from Tahiti with its vibrant culture and New Zealand with, the fierce Maori, now Cook's heading towards this massive, uncharted landmass, New Holland as it was known back then.
Australia.
Exactly. What awaits him there, though, is something he could never have predicted.
It's almost anticlimactic. You'd expect, some grand encounter with the native people. But when Cook and his crew land on the east coast of Australia, they're met with complete indifference.
Seriously?
Yeah, the Aboriginal peoples, they just didn't seem to care. They went about their daily business fishing, hunting, gathering as if this giant ship full of Europeans was just, part of the scenery.
I can only imagine how strange that must have been for Cook and Banks. After all their, experience in Tahiti and New Zealand, Suddenly they're irrelevant.
Yeah, they were used to being the center of attention, the bringers of civilization and all that, and now they're just ignored. It must have been a blow to their egos.
The podcast mentions that they tried to engage with the Aboriginal people, offering gifts of beads and nails, but it didn't really work.
Nope, no dice. The Aboriginal Australians had their own complex societies, their own deep connection to the land. They weren't impressed by these European trinkets.
There's even a story of them throwing rocks back at the Europeans when they tried to offer gifts.
Yeah, talk about a clear message. We don't want what you're selling.
It's amazing, really, that this grand expedition, this symbol of European power and technology, is essentially dismissed as unimportant.
It challenges their entire worldview. They expected to be seen as, gods or at least superior beings, and instead, they're just met with a shrug. It's fascinating.
Did it change Cook's perspective at all?
It's hard to say. He does acknowledge their apparent contentment with their way of life. He even writes in his journal that they might be far more happy than we Europeans.
Really?
Yeah. But even as he's saying that, you can sense that he still can't fully grasp it. He's still viewing them through the lens of European superiority.
It's a bit tragic.
Yeah.
He sees this different way of being, a way of life that seems genuinely happy and fulfilling. But he can't quite let go of his own preconceptions.
It's a struggle that I think a lot of explorers and colonizers face, this tension between curiosity and a sense of superiority.
But despite the misunderstandings and the cultural clashes, there's still moments of genuine discovery, right?
Absolutely. Like the kangaroo.
The kangaroo.
This bizarre creature, unlike anything Europeans had ever seen before, it completely captivated Cook and Banks.
This is how the word kangaroo entered the English language, right? Taken directly from the Aboriginal language.
Exactly. It's a small but significant example of cultural exchange amidst all the complexity.
So Cook's first voyage comes to an end. He returns to England with map specimens and a wealth of experiences that have undoubtedly changed him.
He's hailed as a hero, celebrated for his discoveries and his contributions to science. But I imagine he also carried with him the weight of these encounters, the things he learned, the things he struggled to understand.
It's a complicated legacy, isn't it?
Very much so. On the one hand, Cook's voyages expanded our knowledge of the world, led to advancements in navigation, cartography, and natural sciences. But they also paved the way for European expansion, exploitation, and the displacement of indigenous peoples.
It's a reminder that history is never black and white. It's full of contradictions and unintended consequences.
And I think that's the most important takeaway from this deep dive into Cook's first voyage. It challenges us to confront our own biases, to question our assumptions about progress and civilization, and to strive for a more just and equitable relationship with all cultures and peoples.
Well said. It's been an incredible journey exploring the world through Cook's eyes. And as always, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep seeking deeper understanding.